some area high school students with us today, and I want to thank the ag teachers for allowing their students to come. And if you students don't mind, just raise your hand. Chucky Doak. All right. North Green. All right. South Green. All right. And I don't think there's any from West Green because I got a text this morning from, I can't think of what's the ag teacher? Huh? Short, Adam Short, and said the two that were supposed to be here were out sick today. And so unfortunately they weren't able to be with us. Well, thank you, ag teachers and students, for being with us today. We really do appreciate that. Our next speaker, we have David Bryant, and David is the founder of the Smoky Mountain Cattle Consulting. Matter of fact, he is the one that we purchased the Aitchison no-till drill back in the corner. We purchased that from David. David has, of course, all types of handling facilities and corrals and head gates and screens and all the equipment that you can possibly think of. He's got that available. Also, he is a dealer for Southeast Agri-Seeds, as well as we are here also. And as a matter of fact, we have several today that are going to be picking up some clover seeds. We're getting close to doing some broadcasting of clover seeds. That's one of the things that David's going to talk about. You know, we're only about 3 weeks away, 3 or 4 weeks. And then shortly after that, another 30 days, that no-till drill is going to be out in the ground doing some work. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but at this time, I'm going to have David come forward and with his presentation. David, thank you for being with us.
This on? All right. Thank you all for coming out. So, like Mike introduced me, I'm based here in East Tennessee. I run a consulting company that covers about 8 to 10 states. And we primarily, as the name says, work with cattle producers, but also some small ruminant folks, some dairy folks, that kind of deal. And then I'm a rep for several different companies. Everything is based here in the U.S. except the drill, which is out of New Zealand. And so that's a brief summary. But the main reason I came today, or they asked me to talk about frost seeding. So Southeast Agri-Seeds is based in North Georgia. We have a warehouse there. We also have some sister companies in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. And so they have cool season, warm season perennials, and all types of annuals, and then brassicas, legumes, all kinds of other stuff. But for today, I'll talk about, for the talk at least, for clovers, but I can answer other questions later. Also, I need to point out, unplanned to me, my wife told me just a few minutes ago that apparently I am dressed exactly the same as the photo that's in your book and in the thing over there. And I did not plan that this morning when I put this shirt on, but it's the identical shirt. So congratulations for whatever that's worth. So I like to start talks and interactions just with some definitions. And probably everybody may know as much as I do about clover, but to run over those things. So we'll talk about 2 types of perennials. So clover is a cool season legume. But so 2 types of, I'm going to get there, and of perennials, and then we'll talk about annual clovers as well. So everybody probably has heard of red and white clovers. We have a tremendous number of hybridized clovers that now exist. So what is a clover? So it's a legume, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That is widely grown throughout the United States, especially here in the Southeast. There's been a tremendous amount of research that it can be used for hay or pasture, for forage. So red clover, there's some differences between them, and we're going to talk about that. But so it does do better than alfalfa as a comparison, since alfalfa is a very famous legume that's used all over the world. That can deal better with low soil pH, and we'll talk about soil pH, fertility and soil drainage. But they are very digestible for the animal's standpoint, very palatable. They enjoy the leaves when they bite them off and chew them, and have a lot of protein. And as people have talked about, so we live in an area here that has endophyte infected fescue, so the cool season perennial fescue that we all have grown to love or hate, either way, whatever you want to say, since 1931, since that's where K31 got its name, as a side note. But a lot of people use clovers to dilute the effects of the negative effects, I should say, of the infected fescues. And then there's some novel fescues, and I'm not here to talk about that, but I can answer questions. So a lot of folks do that. Also, so fescue has a protein of, on average, live fescue, meaning if it's just clipped off from the pasture, of 10 to 12 percent crude protein. So red clover on average is going to be about 20% crude protein. So then that's going to help average that back out to raise the fescue average of if it was just fescue alone. The TDN, or total digestible nutrients, okay, obviously like everything else in the world, there are a bunch of acronyms, right? Agriculture is not unique. It has them too. So the digestibility or the usability of red clover, okay, is about 70%. So that's about an average. 100% is fully usable. Everything in that plant is consumed. Just like if we eat a burger or a hamburger, if it was 100% digestible, then we would get all the nutrients out of that possible. So, and then, and I'm going to talk about nitrogen capture in a minute, but for red clover, it can capture, this is on an average because there are a bunch of different hybrids, but it can capture between 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre in a season, or so for red clover, we're talking about all year is how they look at that picture, in the times that it would be growing and active. So obviously nitrogen is not cheap, and it's not getting cheaper. I've heard that it looks like fertilizer, if it's priced, is going to be about $1,000 a ton. I may be off on that, but that's what some people regionally have talked to me about. Now that's blended with potassium and phosphorus as well, not just straight nitrogen. So, all right. And if I have questions, like Mike said, ask. I'm all for that. So white clovers are going to be more of a low-growing clover instead of a more vertical clover like red clovers. And many folks have seen this even in your yard. There are a tremendous amount of white wild clovers that are grown, that just grow, or that birds move, anything like that. So white clovers can get established a little better than red clovers, but they also can move laterally easier than a red clover can. A lot of that's just the physiological and the phenotypical concepts of how that plant work. So its digestibility is higher. It's about 80% digestible as a plant and about 25% crude protein. But as ruminants, they cannot graze all the way to the ground. And so white clovers are going to grow fully to about a height of 5 to 6 inches, compared to red clovers you may see, if they're left alone, they could grow to be knee high. So the animal, the ruminant at least, cannot capture as much of that leaf and stem material in a white clover as it can a red clover. So it's not completely apples to apples. From a nitrogen capture standpoint, it's going to be between 100 and 150 pounds per acre of nitrogen during the growing season. So for crimson clover, also arrowleaf clover, any other annual clovers, so meaning, and this explains that pretty well. I have one error in this slide, and I typed in your notes, I typed does not, and it actually does cause bloat, and so all clovers can have a concept of bloat. The red and crimson clover can have a moderate risk of bloat. White clover has a low risk of bloat. All the risks of bloat, taking a little diversion, but all the risks of bloat is if there's a high concentration of clover in the fields and the animal consumes a lot of it. But most folks, and based on our recommendations of whether we're doing the frost seeding, which I'm going to get to next, or you're drilling it, or it's in a mix, it's going to range about 10 to 15% of the total biomass that's out in the pasture. So that's not anywhere near the level that would be needed to cause bloat really at all. And then there are some things that people can feed to offset the risk of bloat as well, to the level of 100%, almost no risk if the animal consumes these different things. So that can be additives. So people would ask, well, why would I plant an annual clover? And so it's if you really want to add a legume that acts quickly and has a lot of vertical growth and can add protein at a very low cost, then this is something to look at. And the timing of that. Is it going to overwinter? Are you going to plant it in the fall? Are you going to plant it in the spring, etc.? I should note that red and white clovers are going to last on average in a general system that are not overgrazed between 3 and 5 years. So they're not going to last or have the persistence that fescue will, because part of the reason that the dilution effect works, okay, so you got fescue and orchard grass, et cetera, as a cool season perennial, and you have clover. Animals will select the clover to graze before they select the other grasses, because it's more fun to eat those, just like at a buffet. You choose the things that you want to eat first, but then you think, I need to eat this other stuff to help balance my diet for this reason or that reason. So that will affect, when I'm real careful to say about the overgrazing part, they can overgraze, and people call me about orchard grass and some other really great grasses, but they say, well, why do these not last long? And a lot of the reason is they would if they weren't overgrazed, but it's managing that, and so the orchard grasses of the world get overgrazed too. But depending on the type of annual clover and the time of the year that it's planted, it's going to fix or sequester nitrogen-wise between 50 and 150 pounds. That's a big range of nitrogen for the season that it's grown in. On the high end of that, how do we get that? And I know the slide says up to 200 pounds. So some of this is where is the data being taken from? If you planted the crimson clover in the fall, then it has some time to fix nitrogen in the fall, and then it has, doesn't fix anything while it's dormant, and then in the spring it fixes from there. So, all right, so when we talk about fixing nitrogen, this next slide's pretty important. So it's not the plant itself that is fixing the nitrogen. So whether we talk about cowpeas, alfalfa, clover, any other legume, it's the bacteria that's attached to the outside of the plant that is living symbiotically in a friendly relationship to that. So the air that we're breathing right now is about 78% nitrogen gas, about 21% oxygen. The balance is CO2 and some other things that I can't quickly remember. But so this rhizobia bacteria then allows it to fix or capture as it breathes, as the bacteria breathes, the nitrogen gas and convert it to ammonia, which then everybody probably here has either bought or read about or heard of ammonia that you either put on your lawn or you buy at a place that sells fertilizer. So then that is usable to the plant. All of our clovers that we sell are pre-inoculated, but that does not mean that all are pre-inoculated. So that's an important point, take-home message. So whether you go to Tractor Supply, the local co-op, a neighbor down the road that sells seed, our point here is not to sell seed, but is to give out very informed information. So check that. Another big point that people ask me about is, well, if the seeding rate is 2 to 4 pounds for this or 7 to 8 pounds for that, well, I'm not really sowing or drilling or broadcasting that much seed. Does that make sense? If it's coated, are we tracking with that? Okay. So I then get in this back and forth conversation. All right. So the next question is, well, why do we coat the seed? So one is and there are other seeds that are coated, but for the purpose of this is it's convenient. It makes sure that it's inoculated. Also, the coatings that are used today hold moisture. So it's real important to plant dry seed. Plus, it goes through the drill or the broadcaster a lot easier. But because if it gets wet, it's going to stick together like a big clump of dough, basically. And but when it gets in the ground and you get seed to soil contact, which is what we want, then it holds that moisture against the seed. And at the end of the day, why we coat seed or why anybody coats seed is we have a better seeding rate, a better live seed count, or a better live plant count is a better way to say that, than we do if we seed the same thing at the same seeding rate, okay, that's just raw seed and then has been coated like with a concrete mixer is a way to, because it's like a dust, the inoculant is, that is refrigerated, and then it comes in little packets and people blend it, and then you can use a paddle and a big tote, or you can use a concrete mixer that you get at Harbor Freight, wherever. You get a better live plant count that way with coating seed than if it's just raw seed, okay? It's not a smoke and mirrors deal. We're not trying to cheat anybody. But what really matters to us and the animal is you have live clover plants. So that's the 2 cents on that. All right? So, okay. So we're at this time of the year, so it's a good timing to talk about this, to have this conversation about frost seeding. A lot of people have heard about frost seeding, but how do we do that effectively? So it's a form of broadcast overseeding that most people do in perennial cool season pastures here in the southeast U.S. and other places. The key is going to be some prep and timing and then checking pH ahead of time, and I'm going to run through that. But and I've run over a lot of these benefits that are already in this, protein levels. So, so the timing, you want to make sure that there's not a tremendous amount of competition in the field. So we don't want it to be super tall grass. And I've got a photo in here for a second. So we want it to be grazed down if possible. Not all the way to the ground, but as that machine broadcasts the clover out or whatever else you're broadcasting, you don't want it to get caught up at a foot high and never really reach the ground and be eaten by a bird or an animal, and then not get the seed-to-soil contact that we're looking for. So that might require a chain drag. It might require, and I've got another photo of a direct down shot of the soil profile. It might require some vertical tillage. Anything else that you're also planning to do in the field, the dragging of the field might break up manure piles. Anything like that that's going to be beneficial all at the same time with the premise of having, clover seeding. The weather conditions, a lot of folks kind of miss this. So with the naming of frost seeding, we want to actually broadcast when the ground is frozen, when it is hard, so that you don't make any tracks or sink the clover any deeper than it needs to be. So by the timing of this, and with the weather conditions, we're using the natural heaving and thawing, as the ground expands and contracts, then we're using that as a benefit to plant this seed, because clover only needs about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of depth, when it's put into the ground, and that's when it will germinate. So in the mornings, and you look at the forecast and you say, okay, it's 25 degrees this morning, the ground's frozen, then go out and spread at whatever given rate you so choose, and then you look at the forecast and it says in the afternoon it's going to get to be 40 degrees, 45 degrees. Well, then that sun will heat up that soil surface, it'll heave, it'll start taking in those cycles of the freezing and thawing cycles will then start to take that seed in. And that works really well where we're at because of clay. In Florida or Georgia, it doesn't work as well in sandy, silty soil. So this is an excellent way and a cheap way of putting that seed out very accurately for where we're at. Next photo, so this is a photo of the cattle that Mike manages, of some South Pole cattle just behind us, on a hillside behind us. So I would be very fine with where the cattle the heifers are standing, but I would not, go in and broadcast to the other side of where the hot wire is to the left. The next photo is a straight down photo shot, and you can see, so clover's been put out here. That's all in your book. It doesn't show it as well, or it doesn't define it, but you can see all the little clover seeds. So there's both live material here, and then there's dead thatch, and that's fine. But you want to see, some open soil profile, instead of it just being completely covered with either dead or live material, or material that's dormant, so that you know that the clover is getting to the ground. It doesn't do anything some of these clover seeds, like here and over here, they may never get to the ground. An animal may eat it off and consume it, and then the acids in the rumen may affect that clover seed. Yeah, eventually it'll get to the ground, but it may strip off the coating that we've put on the clover seed, and so then the inoculant may be gone with that. Okay?
Hey,
so
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Question and a comment. So typically in Greene County, most of our pastures are overgrazed. Okay?
Yep.
So they're in a good situation to broadcast these clovers.
Excellent condition.
That's an excellent
yes.
way. Then there are some producers that do a good job of managing their forages, and maybe they have 4-6 inches of growth, and they want to go out there and broadcast these clovers. So my question is, number one, if they broadcast like that without doing any light disking, and there's no animals on that, will that seed eventually make its way to the soil profile and germinate or is there going to be too much competition when it starts to grow?
Right.
And then number two is a light disc, and I've done this before, take a lot of the cut out of the disc, but what percentage of open ground would you say you want to kind of shoot for?
I would want, yeah, great question. So on the open ground part, then 10 to 30%. And then Mike's exactly right. If there's a lot of, why we want a low biomass profile, okay, of, 2, 3, 4 inches, is for the part of competition, of even if it's desirable plants, so the cool season perennial base that we have, if it's 6, 12 inches tall, that new clover is not going to grow. It's going to be shaded out completely, and then it's going to be all for naught. Yes, it'll still be there, but then we'll be stunted. It won't get a good chance to grow. So then come in the spring, when you release animals on that pasture in April or late March, you're going to go and you're going to look down at the soil profiling and be like, well, where's all my clover that I spread a month ago? And it will be there, but in small amounts. So that's a great question. So talking about pH, so I put in there some good information about red. So if your goal is to plant red, white, or an annual, what pH it needs or higher. The red clover is the best to broadcast, and then the white and the annuals are about even. There's not one that's better, that perform well when broadcast. I'll say it that way. Clover still needs potassium and phosphorus. So, as everybody's heard 300,000 times, having a soil test is good. If not excellent, if you don't know. But obviously the clover will fix its own nitrogen, as we've talked about. Clover will not perform well if there's a bunch of residual nitrogen already in the soil profile. It's very counterintuitive to the plant, and it won't allow the plant to perform like it will. It's not designed to take up, and it may even burn it, from exterior nitrogen sources. And then also as a side note, other grasses will not perform well if broadcast. They're not heavy enough. They're not. So clover is circular. It's like a ball, but very tiny. So it will throw out from the spreader very uniformly. Fescues, orchard grasses, warm season annuals, other things will not necessarily do that at the same level that clover will. So before I go on, a point on the fixing of nitrogen. Conceptually, a lot of folks think that, I'll try to go back here, these rhizobial nodules that are on the root structure of the legume. A lot of folks think that when the clover plant or any legume uses the nitrogen that it needs, okay, whatever that nitrogen requirement is, that then it shares the extra nitrogen to its friends that are next door, like the fescue plant. Do a lot of people think that? Did my explanation make sense? That is not true, okay? How other plants get nitrogen that is extra, because if you think a clover plant can't use 200 pounds of nitrogen a year, like that's a lot of nitrogen. Other plants do benefit from it indirectly, but what happens is when these die, or when the clover plant is bitten off and some of the root structure dies, then that, just like mulching and anything else, okay, then that thatch material that is both subsoil and above becomes almost immediately available because these are storing so much nitrogen to those neighboring plants. So, so this is and I really appreciate that they printed this huge display, and then a lot of folks can use this for any other plant, much less clover. But it shows for where is our soil pH down here, and then all of these nutrients. Then when you have a full bar here, that means that it's fully available. When you get to the extremes out here, that means that even though the product, the nutrient is available, it's present, it is not available to the plant. So the next slide is a huge take-home message. And this is why lime is the cheapest fertilizer there is. So if the pH is 5, okay, even if all the nitrogen in the world is there in the soil profile, okay, only 53% of the nitrogen is available to the plant. Phosphorus, potassium, you get the point. But that's why forever, so to speak, people have preached about the relationship of pH and plant viability. But not many people share something like this to say this is behind the scenes and this is why. Besides just saying, hey, we feel great and our pH is 7. I wanted to throw that in there. I'm not trying to talk about pH, but it is even important for clover. Sir.
What type of lime are you talking about in this area?
He asked what type of lime would be advisable. And that's a great question, and I have some slides on that, but the short answer or the quick answer that I could feel good about answering is to see what there's a cation exchange capacity of that lime, of how fast it equalizes the acidity of the soil. And so if we talk about dolomitic lime or ash lime, like from a fire plant, like a coal plant, something like that. I mean, there are people that give away free lime. There are conversion factors to that. So even though a soil test may say put 1 ton of lime on, you're exactly right. You got to look at what type of lime that is. And I didn't bring any of those slides or any of that information, so I don't want to mislead you. But there are conversion factors based on the type of lime you buy, that pelletized lime, any of those things that can convert to what it is the soil test group that you've had do the soil test is saying to put on. So just because it says a ton of lime doesn't mean you put a ton on. Some might be more than that, some might be less, to equal that ability to equalize the acidity of the soil. But that's a very good question and very effective, and I should have thrown those in. For everybody's seen like the red spreader here, and a lot of folks may have one that's PTO powered. On the left side is a 12-volt spreader that is available, and why I throw that in there is it can accurately, because we're dealing with such small pounds of seed per acre, it can dial down, we're talking about 2 to 4 or maybe 8 pounds at the most per acre. These big spreaders can't do that accurately. Most of them I've ever dealt with. But the little spreaders can, and you can go a lot faster. If you stick it on an ATV, a UTV, I've done it personally with a pickup truck. The ground's frozen. Stick that thing in the receiver hitch of the truck, and you can drive it 15, 20 miles an hour through the field. But that's hard to do with a tractor, so you can efficiently do that a lot faster. If you do use a PTO spreader, what I I recommend is people add sand, they add lime if they need and know to do that. Cat litter that's biodegradable, and the sand won't hurt us at all here with the high clay soils. But what it'll do is it'll change the rate that the clover that you've mixed together is coming out of that spinner if you can't close it down tight enough. Or my joke of the day, minus the first one with the shirt, was to like get your third or fifth best friend to help you. There we go. So then put them on the back of the tractor with the hand spreader, but then why I say the third or fifth best friend, if they fall off and get hurt, then you got a couple more in front of them. So anyway, that is all. I will be glad to answer questions, sir. Calibrating the broadcast spreader. So then this would be like a PTO. The electric one. Okay, it will, so calibrating the electric, the 12 volt, it will have it'll have a spray pattern, just like a sprayer. And then usually it'll be dialed down, probably the most because they have such a small container. If this goes backwards, that's only going to hold probably one bag, so about 25 pounds. Also, clover usually comes in 25-pound bags because not many people are using a lot of it, a big volume. So then it'll have a setting probably from like 0 to 10 pounds. And then it'll have a gauge of, drive this fast, and then you can calculate, okay, it's going to take me this much time to cover my X number of acres. So, but it will have, so the trick of the calibration is how fast you drive. Because the things that are fixed is the window of the flow gate that it's open, and then the broadcast pattern, if that's 20 feet or 50 feet, those two things are fixed. So the third thing that's a question in the formula is going to be how fast you drive, So, but in the operator's manual of that, with any drill, it's going to say, these are the recommended speeds. Unlike that drill back there, we can weigh it based on how fast it's putting it out. It's distributing seed and other drills that exist, but that'll be both of these will be a big component of how fast you drive. So, sir, he wants to bring the mic. So, yeah.
One of the questions I have about cross seeding is,
Working on it. Maybe the battery died.
Maybe I could request
There you
my
go.
own mic.
Okay, here you go. Yeah.
The problem that I have with frost seeding is not that I can't frost seed, but with rotational grazing, I'll get cattle back on there before the plant is mature.
Right.
Okay, the issue then with frost seeding, with clovers,
Yep.
is they do not come to maturity. They don't set nitrogen.
Right.
They use nitrogen until they're mature plants.
Correct.
So
They start fixing nitrogen at about 40 or 50% of maturity.
okay,
But initially, you're correct. They use nitrogen to start growing from a seedling. That's correct.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but a good point on that. Like it's a very tight window. So what I would maybe look at doing is an annual clover to gain the benefit of the legume, but it's going to grow a lot faster. It's going to accelerate that. Whereas the red and white clovers that people use for generations are much slower growing.
what is the faster growing?
The annual, like the crimson or the arrowleaf or other annual clovers. So those are going to grow in this window of time. It's all a trade-out. If we talk about annuals versus perennials, anything, okay? The real simple explanation is it's time compression versus length of investment. So annuals are cheaper than perennials. I don't care what you're talking about, okay? Apples to apples. And then annuals grow a lot faster because it's a one and done system, okay? And they will out yield and outperform any perennial of the same makeup. But the time investment is they're not going to be there the year in, year out deal. But if that's what we're working with, then the time to the 50% capture of nitrogen is going to be 3 or 4 times faster in that annual clover than it is a perennial clover planted on the same day. So, sir.
I guess my question is if you don't do that soon enough, graze the grass back, the clover back,
okay.
You would also have a problem with the clover not establishing because it would be in competition with the grasses that want to grow real fast, like in the spring.
That is correct. You're saying if
It's
you
like
do not...
It's like a balance.
Right.
Yeah.
You're saying if you don't establish the new clover for the frost seeding
Right, but
soon
if you
enough.
don't graze it back fast enough, then the clover's not going to have a chance to grow because the other grass is going to dominate.
That's correct. Or weeds could overtake it.
Weeds too, right?
That is correct. Yes, based on the timing.
So it's kind of
this.
a balance in your own pasture that you have to figure out.
That is correct. I would also, though we can do it here because of fall frost seeding, that is another time to look at it if the weather played it correctly. I mean, it's not as constant to do that as it is in the spring, but it is possible because we're at the elevation we're at, and you could get an early frost in the fall,
Right.
and then you eliminate weed competition.
Well, I tried that
So-
actually too. I used a clover called Racine clover, frosty, and they said that should help me in the spring.
And it will and you could both do it. So we and Mike and them have done a mix that has crimson in it,
Right.
and it's planted in the fall, and then it overwinters fine, and it's still so you could even not use it in a mix. You could just put it out on a perennial pasture, and then it would overwinter and still be there in the spring, and by that time it would outcompete because it'd be very established, the root structure, your comment on the, just forages in general.
Right.
So, but you're right, it is all a balance of fitting that into the picture of what you need, like as far as what do you need nutritionally,
Right.
what do you need for their diet and things like that, so.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What mix are you using with the crimson clover?
So we have multiple mixes that we mix in our facility, both annuals and perennials, but the mix that they've used a lot of, we can also do custom mixes that you invent, that is Ray's Crazy Mix. We have a fall mix and a summer mix. And the summer mix doesn't have crimson, but it has other clovers, other legumes, cowpeas, and some other stuff. But for the fall, what I'm talking about is Ray's Crazy Mix. And I think we have a couple more that actually have crimson in them as well.
Can you tell me what's in it, or is it?
Oh yeah, I can tell you, but it's off. I mean, it's no secret. It's about 7 or 9 different things. Triticale, cowpeas, 2 types of ryegrasses that are annuals. Let's see, radishes, turnips, so brassicas. So the cowpeas. Oh, winter peas, he's right. Yeah, winter peas. The cowpeas would be for the summer, so yeah.
But you're not frost seeding that.
No, you can broadcast it, but it's not being frost seeded. specifically, no. So, yeah. Any other questions? Sir, yeah.
So I understand that this would not be ideal, but do you have any advice on setting clover down in an already pre-established feeding area that, let's say, doesn't have enough vegetation that a raiser of animals would be looking for?
So you're saying in like a pasture that had been a high-impact pasture?
Yeah, exactly, something
Okay,
like that.
okay, or like, okay. So the first thing I would do is, so that would be okay. I would drag the pasture to try to level it out if it had a lot of hoof prints and all that, because if you don't, then whatever you plant, if it's broadcast, and especially since clover and other things need very little soil cover, then if we get a monsoon rain very soon, like in March, then the dirt from a hoof print that's next to it's going to cover it with like an inch of soil, and then that's not going to germinate. Yeah. So that'd be one consideration, to just drag it, level it out, which you might want to do anyway, because driving over it might be like you were in the Rocky Mountains. So, you might do that anyway with a disc or a drag. But then I wouldn't, if you put the recommended application of 6 or 7 pounds per acre of the clover on it, it's not going to fully cover it. It's not going to take over that area and be a full stand. So I would blend it with something else. In the spring, I would, like now or coming up, I would blend it with some spring oats. And they would, have they will have a nitrogen requirement, but you're planting it with something that has a nitrogen capability. And then they're going to have a pretty nice symbiotic relationship of they're very palatable, wide leaf product, but to get some cover of some type on that so you don't have erosion and other things on that high impact pasture. They also, both clover and oats deal very well with impact. So if it's from animals or machinery, so if it's a pasture that you have to dedicate to sacrifice, because it's around your barn and you're bringing those cattle in, or whatever, sheep, and you're going to hold them for 2 or 3 days and process them or do whatever, and then kick them back out, and they may not be back on it for another 2 months or whatever. It'll perform very well in that environment. So,
All right, because I was just asking, because personally, while my family does rotate fields,
sure,
we do have fields near our barns
Yep.
and corrals such as that are dedicated all year long to where the animals are just consistently moving through. So I was just
Correct.
wondering if...
Oh, it's a good question. And even an annual, when we do like a forage plan for somebody, to have a dedicated sacrificial pasture, or whatever somebody wants to call it, is part of the story. It's a pipe dream to have all your fields perfectly in sync, and one not be partially even dedicated to a high impact situation. You've got to do that, or even for people that ideally want to graze year round, and it's a wonderful idea, but there's going to be drought years, and even if that's 1 out of 10 years, and so then that sacrificial pasture is where you would feed hay or feed a supplement on and let it take a beating while saving those other perimeter fields, or however you design the plan, so that then the following year when we have rain again and it's not a drought, you didn't destroy those fields as well during that drought year. You just focus on destroying that one field. So that's a great question. So,
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. Thank you all.
I've got one more question
Yep.
for you. Okay, so you made a comment that clover seeds lifespan 3 to 5 years. I
For
agree with that.
perennials.
Yeah,
Yep,
for
yep.
perennials.
Mhm.
Okay, so is there another option to extend those? And this would be my question. let's say in your rotational grazing program, you let a field rest long enough that that clover's going to come up, it's going to produce seed.
Yeah.
All right? And you take one field a year and you rotate a different field every year. And so as those seeds come up and grow and mature,
Right.
animals come in there. Is that a viable reseeding program?
It is especially for the red. It's hard for the white clover because they're so low growing. It would even be better to clip those mechanically, the red clovers and the white clovers. If you mechanically chop and thatch that, then you're not unnecessarily exposing the clover seed or any seeds to the rumen, which is a pretty brutal environment. And so then you're going to decrease the live seed count. If you let the animal, the ruminant, bite off the top of that clover bloom that has a seed in it, and then you let it process through that animal, of course, and then be defecated out, and then the patty of manure is then spread out equally so you have good seed to soil contact. Will things germinate and grow? The answer is yes, but they're not going to grow as well as if you buy seed from somebody. And the live seed count of what all that is going to be lower. I'm going to guess it's between 50 and 70%. So it is something that very much can be done, but the live seed count, if you just take and bush hog it or clip it or even mow it, some of that, just like people harvest seed off the top of their mowing machine, and put it in a bucket and use it next year, or rebroadcast it in an area that they fed hay, and that's all destroyed and torn up. So that would be a better way of doing that than just letting the animals, if the goal was reseeding solely, then versus the consumption of the biomass for the animal's benefit, I would go in and clip it to get reseeding of all of those plants, pretty equally than letting the animals do it. Because again, they're going to selectively graze the clover before the other stuff. So then you're not, you're going to get more, you're going to push the balance. If it was 10 or 15% clover and the rest of things grasses, you're going to unintentionally drive down the clover side because they're going to first graze the clover, and then they're going to graze the grasses. And so the clovers are going to be affected by the rumen first, then the grasses. And so it's going to offset that balance even a little more. It's going to, little by little, it's going to change that window of how it's processed through the animal. And I didn't bring data on what the rumen does, but it's an amazing but pretty crazy environment of what it does to seeds and anything else that it consumes, So anyway, but great question. So that can be done.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for David? I got one more. Okay.
When you cut hay
Yes,
and
ma'am.
you've got a lot of clover in it,
Mhm.
a lot of times the other hay will be ready and cured out before the clover.
Right.
Are there certain species that you,
Dries down better. This is for dry hay, I assume.
Yes.
Yes. So good question. So the about drying clover, because we don't, clover and alfalfa and any legume can mold, or it has a higher propensity to mold. And as a side note, to entertain your friends when you're at coffee tomorrow morning, so people have heard of the blood thinner Coumadin. Okay, so that was discovered by accident at the University of Wisconsin because they fed clover to dairy cows and a bunch of them died. And the reason is it was moldy clover. And so we can thank modern medicine. And so that's actually who owned the original patent on Coumadin, is the University of Wisconsin, because they posted the animals and they said, well, why is this? So they bled internally, and then that's in rat poison and a bunch of other things. So we can thank clover for that. But, and that helps a lot of people day in, day out. But it also can hold moisture, and it's hard to dry down, and therefore that's how we get mold, and that's exactly what they did. They baled it too fast, and this was years ago, like 40-ish years ago, but that's why. So the white clovers will be easier to dry down because there's less biomass with them. And then there are some hybrids of that we have that the stem and the leaves will dry down for the purpose of hay faster than others. And like everything else, they're coming out with new hybrids every year and testing different things. So I don't have any of those name brands right now. We just were released, was it yesterday or the day before, our new sheet. So we just were released our new spring sheet for Southeast Agri-Seeds, and I haven't memorized it because it's like 5 pages of stuff. Then each line is about a quarter of an inch tall. So, but I can look that up in the back on my phone or whatever to get you some brands that will dry down faster than others. But that's a very fair question, and just like other, we have like some summer annuals that dry down faster, Sudan grasses, other stuff like that. So it's a great question. So, and a concern, or can be. So, I would also not, just like alfalfa, not handle the crop as much as you can before baling, because if you ted it too many times, all of that, it's going to knock a lot of the leaves off and destroy the plant, because it is a delicate plant, you know, versus how fescue is a very hardy, robust plant, and it could be tedded 15 times and be about the same nutrition from when we started. But if it's clover, it will not be. You know, you will not get the protein won't be there and things like that if it's handled more and more. So because the longer a plant, after it's been mowed, sits on the ground, the protein and the other nutrients of that plant leach back into the soil profile. And so that's why you have this declining return. Like mowing hay is a losing proposition, because like if you start at 100%, the farther you go between the time it's mowed and this is for anything, then you bale it, you know, that window of opportunity and the percentage of any nutrients in it, just you go down and down and down the longer it sits on the ground. And so, because even the dew in the mornings, then that moisture then leaches, that as it dries out, the drier and drier it gets, then that moisture from the dew, even minus rain, leaches back into the soil. So yeah, and then handling the hay and storing the hay and then feeding it back to the animal. If we started with 100% hay bale, the animal doesn't get 100% of that hay bale. Some of it's in the barn lot, some of it's on the road where we towed it, you know, some of it the baler didn't capture because it, you know, didn't get tied correctly, all that. That's why I say it's a losing proposition. You know, I'm not trying to be discouraging, I'm just trying to be upfront and honest with it. But yeah, so the faster that can all be done. So, but anyway, great. Thank you all.
Good deal. Thank you,
Very
David.
much.